Gabriel Crawford stood in the living room of his Capitol Hill condo, holding a folded bank statement like a confession. He wasn't bankrupt, not even close, but he was done pretending not to see the truth hiding behind his wife's curated smile. What she didn't know was that $12 million sat untouched in a blind trust, while she calculated timelines and leverage over cheap wine with her best friend. The moment he said, "I'm bankrupt," would be the moment everything unraveled. Because what she said next wouldn't be fear. It would be strategy. And Gabriel was about to hear every word. Before we continue, what would you do if you discovered your spouse was counting down days until they could cash out of your marriage? Because that's exactly what Gabriel is about to discover. And what he does next will either break your heart or earn your respect. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to see how this psychological game plays out, because I promise you, the phone call Gabriel is about to record will change everything you think you know about love and loyalty. Now let's get back to the story, because the words coming out of Debra's mouth in the next 60 seconds will leave you absolutely speechless. The Seattle rain streaked the windows of their Capitol Hill condo as Gabriel sat at the kitchen island, rehearsing a lie that felt like swallowing glass. The place was beautiful, minimalist furniture, marble countertops, the kind of space that looked expensive but never felt warm. Debra had decorated every piece carefully chosen to photograph well for her Instagram. She called it aspirational living. Gabriel called it lonely. He adjusted his thin glasses and glanced at his phone. 6:47 p.m. Debra would be home any minute from her boutique staging consultation. He'd practiced the words a dozen times. The company's restructuring. I'm being let go. We're going to have to make some serious changes. None of it was true. Gabriel was still the supply chain logistics manager at a mid-sized tech firm, pulling in his steady $80,000. But more importantly, he was a silent partner in a software startup that had sold to Google 5 years ago for enough money to change everything, if he'd wanted it to. Instead, he'd buried it in a blind trust, told no one, and kept living like a man who counted pennies. Because Gabriel had learned something important about silence. It revealed people. The door clicked open. Debra swept in wearing tailored black athleisure and designer sneakers, her highlighted blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl by the entrance and glanced at him with that controlled expression he'd come to recognize. Polite interest, masking complete disengagement. "You're home early," she said, the same words she'd used 3 weeks ago when he'd come home mid-afternoon with a supposed migraine. That day, he'd overheard her on the phone with Vivian, her best friend, laughing over wine about marriage timelines. "Once we hit 5 years, the alimony calculation changes," Debra had whispered. "My lawyer said that's when it gets real." Gabriel had stood frozen in the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd wanted to burst in, to confront her, to demand an explanation. Instead, he'd done what he always did, retreated into observation, watched, waited, confirmed his worst suspicions through careful, agonizing patience. Now Debra was looking at him with those same rehearsed eyes. "Everything okay?" Gabriel set down the bank statement he'd been holding. "We need to talk." She stiffened almost imperceptibly, her hand still on the counter. "About what?" He took a slow breath, keeping his voice steady. "I got let go today." Silence. Not shock, not sympathy, just a strange, calculating stillness. Then her voice came pitched slightly too high. "What? But how? Why?" "Restructuring. Budget cuts. They're downsizing the entire logistics division. I'm out effective immediately." He watched her carefully, watched the way her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, watched how her pupils dilated, not with grief but with something sharper. Math. Debra was always good at math. She stopped, swallowed. "That's terrible, Gabriel. I mean, what are we going to do?" "We'll need to make changes," he said quietly, letting exhaustion color his voice. "Probably sell the condo. I'll have to tap into my retirement account just to keep us afloat for a few months. Maybe move somewhere cheaper. Rent to maybe, or Tacoma." There it was. Panic flickered across her face like a match struck in darkness. I need a minute," she said, her voice tight. "I'm going to call Vivian. I just need to process this." "Of course," Gabriel said, his tone understanding. "Take your time." She turned and walked toward the bedroom, her footsteps quick and uneven. Gabriel waited 30 seconds, then followed, his movements silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped just outside the bedroom door, his phone already recording in his jacket pocket. Through the thin wall, Debra's voice came through in a frantic hiss. "Vivian, it's bad. He just told me he got fired." A pause. "No, I'm serious. This ruins everything." Gabriel's chest tightened, but he kept listening. If he's unemployed, the alimony calculation is based on his current income, not the $80,000. I could end up with nothing. Another pause, longer this time. We're still 8 months from the 5-year mark. 8 months, Viv. I can't wait that long if he's not working. What if he takes some $50,000 job, and that's all I get calculated from? Her voice dropped even lower. I can't just leave now. That would be stupid. We planned this, hit 5 years, split the retirement account, take half the savings, collect spousal support for 3 years minimum. That's almost $150,000 over time. Easy money. Gabriel felt something cold settle into his bones. The woman he'd married was reducing their entire relationship to a spreadsheet, calculating returns like she was planning a real estate flip. Then Debra said the words that would change everything. "I stopped loving him over a year ago. Maybe longer. He's just so boring, predictable. He comes home, eats dinner, watches the same documentaries, falls asleep by 10 like he's ancient. I'm 31, Viv. I'm not wasting my life like this." Gabriel stood frozen, his hand pressed against the wall to steady himself. The recording was still running. Every word, every calculation, every cold dismissal captured. He stepped back slowly, returned to the living room, and ended the recording. Then he pulled up Sabrina Stallone's contact, his divorce attorney, the one he'd quietly consulted 2 weeks ago, just to understand his options. "I got it," he told her when she answered. "Everything, word for word." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Gabriel, that changes the entire strategy. Forward it to me immediately. We're filing this week." He hung up and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. Debra came downstairs 20 minutes later, her face composed into perfect concern. "We'll get through this," she said softly, sitting beside him. "We're a team, right? For better or worse." Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing his wife's face. "Right," he said quietly. "A team." But in his mind, something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about clarity, and he was done being anyone's long-term investment strategy. The morning after the recording, Gabriel woke before dawn. The condo was silent except for Debra's even breathing beside him. He slipped out of bed, dressed in the dark, and drove through empty Seattle streets to Sabrina's downtown office in the Columbia Center. By 8 a.m., he'd signed papers moving half their joint savings into an individual account. Exactly half down to the cent. Nothing illegal, just protection. He changed his beneficiaries' retirement accounts, life insurance, removing Debra's name and replacing it with his mother's. It felt surgical and personal, necessary. "We're filing a petition today," Sabrina told him, her Armani suit crisp, even at this early hour. "She'll be served by Friday. You have 3 days to prepare for whatever storm follows." Gabriel nodded, though his hands were shaking slightly. "I'm ready." But Sabrina's expression shifted, something cautious entering her eyes. "There's something else we need to discuss. I'm bringing in Rachel Carpani, forensic accountant. She'll do a complete asset review to ensure we haven't missed anything that could complicate the settlement." "Why would there be complications?" Gabriel asked. "Everything straightforward." "Humor me," Sabrina said. "In cases like these, we want to be thorough, especially if your wife's attorney decides to dig." 2 days later, Rachel called. Gabriel was at his desk at work, reviewing shipping manifests, when his phone buzzed. "Gabriel, we need to meet. Today." There was something in her voice, careful, measured, that made his stomach drop. They met at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market, rain hammering the windows. Rachel was in her 40s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She opened her laptop without preamble. "I found your trust," she said quietly. "The one from the Google acquisition." Gabriel's blood turned to ice. "That's protected. It's a blind trust, premarital. She has no claim to it." "Legally, you're correct," Rachel said. "But there's a problem." She turned the laptop toward him, showing a dense legal document covered in highlights. When the trust was established 5 years ago, There was a filing error. The trust documents weren't properly recorded with the county within the required time frame. It's a technical issue, but it creates a gray area. What kind of gray area? Rachel's expression was grim. If Debra's attorney discovers this trust, and trust me, they will, they could argue it should be considered marital property due to the filing error. It's unlikely they'd win, but it would drag this out for months, maybe years, and it would expose everything. Gabriel felt the walls closing in. The one thing he'd kept hidden, the one shield he'd maintained, was suddenly vulnerable. There's more, Rachel continued. I also found evidence that Debra has been consulting with a lawyer for at least 6 months. I pulled her email metadata. She's been forwarding financial documents to an attorney named Mitchell Reeves. He specializes in high-asset divorces. Gabriel stared at her. 6 months. She's been planning this longer than you thought, Gabriel. And if she knows about the trust or even suspects it exists, she's been playing a much longer game than we realized. The rain continued to pound the windows as Gabriel absorbed this. His careful plan, his patient strategy. Suddenly, it all felt fragile. Debra hadn't just been waiting for the 5-year mark. She'd been building a case, gathering evidence, consulting experts. What do we do? He asked. Sabrina, who joined them halfway through the conversation, leaned forward. We move fast. We file immediately. We disclose the trust proactively. And we argue the technicality is irrelevant because the asset predates the marriage. But Gabriel, her eyes were hard. You need to be prepared for this to get ugly. She's not just going to roll over. Not with this much money, potentially, at stake. Gabriel drove home through the rain, his mind spinning. When he walked into the condo, Debra was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with that same practice smile. How was your day? She asked, as if nothing had changed. Fine, Gabriel said. Just fine. But nothing was fine. And in 48 hours, when Debra was served with divorce papers, she'd finally understand that she wasn't the only one who knew how to plan. Friday came with the kind of rain Seattle was famous for. Steady, relentless, gray. Gabriel was at his desk when his phone buzzed with a text from Sabrina. She's been served. He stared at the message, waiting for something. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Instead, he just felt hollow. 20 minutes later, Debra called. He let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello. Her voice was sharp, shaking. What the hell is this, Gabriel? I just got divorce papers delivered to my staging office. In front of my clients. I think the papers explain everything, he said, his voice flat. You were fired 3 days ago, and now you're divorcing me? What happened to talking, to working through things? Gabriel leaned back in his chair. I wasn't fired, Debra. That was a test. Silence. Heavy and dangerous. What? It was a test, he repeated. And you failed spectacularly. You lied to me? Her voice was climbing. You made me think we were in crisis, just to... I know about the call with Vivian, Gabriel cut in, his voice steady. I know you've been planning this for months. I know you calculated exactly how much you'd get if you waited for the 5-year mark. I know you stopped loving me over a year ago and stayed for the payout. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, barely a whisper. How do you know all that? I recorded it. Every word. You were listening. Her voice was venomous now. You set me up. I protected myself, Gabriel corrected. You were playing a game, Debra. You just didn't realize I knew the rules. You manipulative bastard, says the woman who turned our marriage into a retirement plan. She hung up. That evening, Debra didn't come home. She texted that she was staying at Vivian's. Gabriel didn't reply. He sat in a quiet condo, surrounded by furniture chosen for aesthetics rather than comfort, and felt nothing. The next morning, Sabrina called. Her attorney reached out. Mitchell Reeves. He wants to negotiate. What's the offer? 3 years of spousal support at $2,000 a month, plus a $40,000 settlement from your retirement account. Gabriel almost laughed. She still thinks she's entitled to something. She's not, Sabrina agreed. We're rejecting it. But here's where it gets interesting. Reeves mentioned the trust. Gabriel's stomach clenched. How does he know? Debra must have suspected something. Maybe she saw paperwork. Maybe she hired an investigator. Either way, they're threatening to make the trust a central issue in court. They'll argue the filing error makes it marital property. But it's not. Legally, no. But it'll drag this out. Months of depositions, hearings, legal fees. And Gabriel, Sabrina's voice softened. If this goes to trial, your financial privacy disappears. Everything becomes public record. Gabriel stared out the window at the rain-soaked city. This was the cost of truth, he realized. Not just confrontation, but exposure. 2 weeks later, Gabriel agreed to meet Debra face-to-face. Neutral ground. The Columbia Center's observation deck, empty on a weekday afternoon. They stood by the windows overlooking Elliott Bay, the city sprawling beneath them in shades of gray and green. Debra looked different, thinner, tired. Her usual polish dulled. She spoke first. Mitchell says you have money I didn't know about. I do, Gabriel admitted. A trust from before we met. It's protected. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to know if you loved me for who I was, not what I had. She turned to face him, something breaking in her expression. So you lied about everything? Your salary, your life, just to test me? No, Gabriel said quietly. I lived modestly because money never mattered to me. Comfort did. Peace did. Partnership did. I didn't tell you because I wanted a marriage that wasn't built on dollar signs. And instead, you got a wife who calculated her exit strategy. Debra's laugh was bitter. Congratulations, Gabriel. You were right. I'm exactly what you suspected. You weren't always, he said. I saw the woman you used to be. Before Vivian. Before the lawyers. Before you started measuring everything in terms of ROI. Debra's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a partner and started seeing you as security. But I did. And I'm not asking you to forgive that. Good, Gabriel said. Because I can't. They stood in silence, the city lights beginning to flicker on below as evening approached. I'm not fighting the trust, Debra said finally. Mitchell can push all he wants, but I'm done. I'll take the standard settlement. No alimony. Split the marital assets and we're finished. Gabriel studied her face. Why? Because dragging this out won't change what I did. And because she stopped, her voice catching. Because maybe I want to stop being the person who treats love like a transaction. Gabriel nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something close to honesty. I hope you figure it out, he said. I hope you find someone who never makes you test them, Debra replied. Then she walked away, and Gabriel watched her disappear into the elevator, carrying everything that used to be theirs. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. No courtroom drama, no final confrontation. Just a file stamped by a judge in King County Superior Court, dissolving what had once felt permanent. Gabriel signed the papers in Sabrina's office, his hand steady. Debra had signed the day before. It's done, Sabrina said, sliding the documents into a folder. Marital assets split evenly, no spousal support. Trust remains protected. Clean break. Gabriel nodded. Thank you. You did the hard part, she replied. You chose dignity over destruction. That's rarer than you'd think. He walked out into Seattle's autumn air, the city damp and golden with fallen leaves. For the first time in months, Gabriel felt like he could breathe. The following week, he moved out of a Capitol Hill condo. Debra had already taken her things, designer furniture, curated artwork, everything that made the place look expensive but feel cold. Gabriel rented a smaller one-bedroom in Fremont, close to the water. It had exposed brick, old hardwood floors, and a view of the ship canal. It wasn't polished, but it was his. Work became steadying. Gabriel threw himself into logistics projects, optimized shipping routes, earned quiet praise from his director. The $80,000 salary was enough. The $12 million in the trust remained untouched, a safety net he'd probably never need, but no longer had to hide. Theo, his firefighter friend, dragged him out to a Sounders game. They drank overpriced beer, yelled at bad calls, and talked about nothing important. It felt good, normal, human. One evening, Gabriel walked into Elliott Bay Book Company and ordered coffee at the cafe. The place smelled like old paper and rain. He found a corner table, pulled out a book on supply chain innovation, and settled in. Is this seat taken? He looked up. A woman in her early 30s stood there, holding a sketchbook and a latte. She had dark curly hair pulled into a loose bun, paint-stained fingers, and warm brown eyes. No designer labels, no performance. Just presence. It's yours, Gabriel said, gesturing to the chair. Thanks. I'm Caroline, she said, sitting down. Landscape architect. I come here to sketch when I need to think. Gabriel. Supply chain logistics. I come here to not think. She laughed, and it was genuine, unself-conscious and bright. They talked for an hour about Seattle's rain, about whether the city was losing its soul to tech money, about the best hiking trails near Snoqualmie. She didn't ask what he did for a living in the probing way people did when they were calculating worth. She asked because she was curious about him, not his utility. When they parted, Caroline scribbled her number on a coffee sleeve. If you ever want to not think again, call me. Gabriel held the coffee sleeve like it was fragile. I will. And 3 days later he did. Their first date was at Gasworks Park, walking along the water as seaplanes landed on Lake Union. Caroline talked about her work designing public green spaces, about believing cities needed places where people could just exist without purpose. Gabriel found himself telling her about his marriage, not in detail, but enough. How he'd learned that love couldn't be tested, only trusted. How he'd chosen peace over revenge. That takes strength, Caroline said quietly. Walking away before bitterness wins. It was the only way to keep myself, Gabriel replied. She looked at him with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Respect without agenda. Interest without calculation. They saw each other again, and again, slow, easy, and forced. She introduced him to her art collector friends, and Gabriel realized he was laughing more than he had in years. She didn't need him to be anything other than present. And presence, he was learning, was the most honest currency. 6 months after the divorce, Gabriel ran into Debra at a Pike Place Market coffee stand. It was awkward for half a second, then surprisingly calm. How are you, she asked. She looked healthier, clearer. Her Instagram had disappeared. She'd taken a job at a nonprofit doing housing advocacy. Good, Gabriel said. Really good. I'm glad. And she meant it. I'm in therapy now, working through a lot. Figured out I was chasing security because I never had it growing up. It doesn't excuse what I did, but at least I understand it now. That's important, Gabriel said. I heard you're seeing someone, the architect. He smiled slightly. Caroline. Yeah. Debra nodded. I hope she's good to you. She is. They stood there for a moment. Two people who used to share a life. Now just two strangers with history. I'm sorry, Gabriel. For real this time. Not because I got caught. Because I became someone I'm ashamed of. I believe you, he said. And he did. She walked away into the market crowd. And Gabriel felt nothing but a quiet kind of closure. That evening, Caroline came over to his Fremont apartment. They cooked dinner together. Something simple, pasta and wine. And talked about a green space project she was designing in Ballard. Gabriel told her about a logistics problem he'd solved that saved the company $200,000 annually. Neither topic was glamorous. Both mattered because they mattered to each other. Later, sitting on his couch with the window cracked to let in the sound's cool air, Caroline leaned into him. You know what I like about you, she said. What? You're not trying to be anyone else. You're just here. Gabriel kissed her forehead, feeling something settle deep in his chest. Not fireworks or fate, just calm, trust, the quiet certainty that he'd found something real. He'd learned the hardest lesson a person can learn, that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones calculating your value. But he'd also learned something more important. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need grand gestures or public vindication. You just need clarity, the courage to protect your peace, and the wisdom to walk away before bitterness becomes your story. Gabriel was writing a new one now, and this time it was built on presence, not performance. So here's my final question for you, and I genuinely want to know, do you think Gabriel should have exposed Debra publicly, or was his quiet exit the ultimate power move? Because here's what I know. If this story made you feel something, if Gabriel's journey from avoidance to self-respect hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever had to choose dignity over revenge, then you're exactly who needs to be subscribed to this channel. Every single week, we bring you real stories about people facing impossible choices. Stories about betrayal, redemption, loyalty, and what it costs to choose yourself. So if you're not subscribed yet, Hit that button right now, turn on notifications, and help us get this channel to 1,000 subscribers before the month ends. Share this with someone who's staying in something they should walk away from. And remember what Gabriel learned. You don't need revenge to win. You just need clarity and the courage to protect your peace. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, choose yourself.